The grandmother sat quietly in her cell on death row. Her grey hair was neatly combed, her hands folded in prayer. To visitors, she looked like any sweet elderly woman, the kind who baked cookies for church, the kind who knitted blankets for grandchildren. But Velma Barfield had killed 6 people, maybe more. She poisoned them slowly, watched them suffer, held their hands as they died. For years, she moved through small North Carolina towns, caring for the sick and elderly, earning their trust, then ending their lives. The newspapers would call her the death row granny, but to her victims, she was the woman they trusted most. This is the story of death dressed as kindness. If you're interested in true crime cases like this, please hit that like button. It helps the channel grow. Velma Bullard was born on the 29th of October, 1932 in Eastover, North Carolina. She was raised near Fayetteville in a troubled household. Her father was physically abusive and violent. Her mother never stepped in to protect the children. The father's abuse created fear and tension throughout the house. Young Velma learned that home wasn't safe. She watched her father's violence destroy their family day by day. She saw how powerless her mother was to stop it. The abuse shaped her understanding of relationships and control. Violence became normal in her world. Fear was a constant companion. At school, Velma was quiet and withdrawn. She carried the weight of family secrets. Teachers noticed she seemed older than her years. The violence at home aged her quickly. Other children seemed carefree and innocent. Velma had lost that innocence early. She dreamed of escape from her father's house. Marriage seemed like her only way out. Any man would be better than staying home. Velma learned to hide her true feelings. She became skilled at presenting a false face. These skills would serve her deadly purposes later. At 17, Velma married Thomas Burke in 1949. He offered her escape from her abusive home. For a while, her life seemed to improve dramatically. The couple had 2 children and were reportedly happy at first. Velma finally had the family she'd always wanted. Thomas provided stability she'd never known before. Their early years together were peaceful. Velma threw herself into motherhood completely. She seemed to have found her place in the world. But everything changed when Velma had a hysterectomy. The surgery left her with chronic back pain. Simple daily tasks became difficult and painful. Doctors prescribed powerful painkillers to help her cope. The pills provided relief from physical pain, but they also created a dangerous dependency. The prescription drugs changed Velma's personality completely. She became dependent on pills to function normally. The medication made her moody and unpredictable. Her behavior became erratic and concerning. She would swing between depression and agitation. Family members noticed the disturbing changes. Thomas started drinking heavily around this time. The happy marriage turned into constant conflict. Both spouses were battling their own demons now. Arguments between Thomas and Velma became bitter and frequent. The prescription drug addiction made Velma increasingly difficult. Thomas used alcohol to escape the tension at home. Neither spouse knew how to break the cycle. Their children watched their parents destroy each other. The household became toxic and unstable. By 1969, Thomas and Velma's marriage was falling apart. The drinking and drug use had destroyed their relationship. Violence had entered their home once again. Thomas would come home drunk and angry. He would rage at Velma and the children. The cycle of abuse Velma had escaped was repeating. On the 4th of April, 1969, Thomas had been drinking heavily again. He passed out in their house after another difficult day. Velma took their children and left the house that evening. This was unusual behavior for Velma. She rarely left Thomas alone when he was drunk, but that night she gathered the children and drove away. When they returned hours later, they found a horrific scene. The house had burned to the ground completely. Thomas Burke was dead inside the ruins. The fire department ruled it an accident immediately. A cigarette left burning had caused the blaze. At least that's what the official report said, but some details didn't add up perfectly. The fire had burned unusually hot and fast. Thomas had been too drunk to escape. Velma told investigators she was devastated by the loss. She played the grieving widow perfectly for everyone, but people close to her noticed something strange. Unlike other widows, Velma didn't seem completely broken by grief. She appeared more relieved than destroyed by the tragedy. Some wondered if the fire had been salvation or liberation. Her children were too young to understand fully. They accepted their mother's explanation of the accident, but years later, they would have questions. In 1970, Velma married Jennings Barfield. He was a kind widower who seemed to care for her. The community thought it was a good match. Jennings was everything Thomas hadn't been. He was sober, responsible, and gentle with Velma's children. He offered stability and genuine affection. For less than a year, they lived as husband and wife. Velma seemed happier than she had been in years. The children began to trust their new stepfather. But Jennings started getting sick in early 1971. He complained of heart problems and other symptoms. The illness came on suddenly and progressed rapidly. His symptoms were concerning and mysterious. Doctors couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong. Tests came back inconclusive or normal. Velma played the devoted wife during his illness perfectly. She took him to doctors and stayed by his side. She prepared his meals and gave him medications carefully. She seemed genuinely concerned about his condition. Neighbors praised her dedication to her sick husband. Everyone thought she was doing everything possible. Jennings grew weaker despite medical treatment. His condition deteriorated day by day. The doctors tried different approaches without success. On the 22nd of March, 1971, Jennings Barfield died from heart complications. The death certificate listed natural causes as expected, but years later, investigators would discover the truth. In 1974, Velma's mother, Lillian Bullard, became violently ill. She suffered from intense diarrhea, vomiting, and severe nausea. The symptoms were alarming and came on suddenly. Lillian had been visiting Velma's house for several days. She had been healthy when she arrived. The illness struck without warning during her stay, but after a few days of misery, Lillian recovered completely. The family was relieved she had beaten the illness. They had no idea it was actually poisoning. Velma appeared concerned and caring during her mother's illness. She nursed Lillian through the worst symptoms. Everyone praised her devotion to her sick mother. During a Christmas visit later that year, Lillian became sick again. The same symptoms returned with devastating force this time. This time, she didn't recover from the attack. The illness was more severe than before. Lillian couldn't keep anything down for days. She grew weak and dehydrated rapidly. Lillian Bullard died on the 30th of December, 1974, after being hospitalized. The doctors couldn't explain what had made her so ill. They assumed it was some kind of stomach virus. The death occurred right after Christmas. The family was devastated to lose their matriarch. The holiday season would never be the same. Velma appeared devastated by her mother's death completely. She had been caring for Lillian during both illnesses. Everyone praised her devotion to her sick mother, but Velma would later confess that she had poisoned Lillian Bullard. Her own mother had become another victim of her deadly habits. In 1975, Velma was convicted of writing bad checks. She had been forging signatures to get money for drugs. Her prescription drug addiction was expensive and consuming. The court sentenced her to 6 months in prison. It was her first serious criminal conviction. The judge hoped it would be a wake-up call. Velma served only 3 months before being released early. The short prison stay should have been a warning. Instead, she returned to her deadly activities with renewed caution. Prison had taught her to be more careful. She learned to cover her tracks better. She became more methodical in her approach. During this time, Velma discovered her true calling as a caregiver. Families trusted her completely with their elderly relatives. She seemed so caring and devoted to their needs. Her gentle manner and grandmother appearance were perfect. She looked harmless and trustworthy to everyone. No one suspected the darkness beneath the surface. What these families didn't know was they were inviting death in. Velma had learned that people rarely question natural deaths. Elderly people died all the time from various causes. She had found the perfect cover for murder. Caregiving gave her access to vulnerable victims. It also provided a legitimate reason for deaths. After her release, Velma began working for Montgomery and Dolly Edwards. They were an elderly couple in Lumberton who needed help. The family thought Velma was perfect for the job. Montgomery Edwards was the first to fall ill. He developed the same symptoms Velma's previous victims had experienced: stomach problems, weakness, and rapid decline. On the 29th of January, 1977, Montgomery Edwards died. The family was heartbroken, but not suspicious. He had been sick for weeks. Just over a month later, Dolly Edwards became ill. She experienced identical symptoms to those that killed her husband. The family was devastated to lose both spouses quickly. Dolly Edwards died on the 1st of March, 1977. 2 deaths in the same household within weeks. But still no one suspected murder. Velma had been present for both deaths. She had cooked their meals during their illnesses. The family trusted her completely. In 1977, Velma took another caregiving position. This time, she worked for Record Lee, a woman who had broken her leg. The job seemed perfect for Velma's skills. But it was Record's husband, John Henry Lee, who caught Velma's attention. He was a man with means and property. He also began asking uncomfortable questions about Velma's background. John Henry started experiencing severe stomach and chest pains. He suffered from violent vomiting and diarrhea. The symptoms were identical to Velma's other victims. John Henry Lee died on the 4th of June, 1977. The family mourned another sudden loss. They had no idea their trusted caregiver had murdered him. Velma would later confess to poisoning John Henry Lee with arsenic. He had become suspicious of her activities. She couldn't let him expose her secrets. Velma's next victim was Roland Stewart Taylor. He was her boyfriend and also a relative of Dolly Edwards. Stewart was a kind man who cared deeply for Velma, but Stewart made a fatal mistake. He discovered that Velma had been forging checks on his account. She was stealing money to fund her prescription drug addiction. When Stewart confronted Velma about the forged checks, she knew trouble was coming. He could expose her crimes and send her to prison. She couldn't let that happen. Velma mixed arsenic-based rat poison into Stewart's beer and tea. She did it carefully, making sure he wouldn't taste anything unusual. Then she waited for the poison to work. Stewart Taylor became violently ill in early February 1978. He suffered the same symptoms as all of Velma's victims: severe stomach pain, vomiting, and weakness. Velma played the concerned girlfriend perfectly. She rushed Stewart to the hospital. She stayed by his side during his illness. Stewart Taylor died on the 3rd of February, 1978. Velma told everyone she had been trying to nurse him, but an autopsy would reveal arsenic in his system. This time, the death would not go unnoticed. Stewart Taylor's death finally raised suspicions. Unlike Velma's previous victims, Stewart was young and healthy. His sudden illness and death seemed unusual. The hospital contacted the local sheriff's office. Deputies began asking questions about Stewart's final days. They interviewed Velma and other people who had been around Stewart. Detective work revealed an unusual pattern. Multiple people had died while under Velma's care. Each death had similar symptoms and circumstances. On May 13, 1978, Velma Barfield was arrested for murder. She was 55 years old and had been killing for years. The arrest shocked the small community. Neighbors couldn't believe that the quiet grandmother was capable of murder. She had seemed so normal, so caring. How could someone like her be a killer? Velma initially denied all charges. She claimed Stewart had died from natural causes. She suggested that someone else must have poisoned him, but detectives had evidence. Velma had purchased rat poison shortly before Stewart's death. She had access to his food and drinks. Under pressure, Velma's story began to fall apart. She changed her version of events several times. She contradicted herself repeatedly. Finally, faced with overwhelming evidence, Velma Barfield confessed to murder. Over the following weeks, detectives built cases for the other deaths. They exhumed Jennings Barfield's body and found traces of arsenic. They investigated the deaths of her other victims. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple people had died from arsenic poisoning under Velma's care. She had been present for each death. Faced with multiple murder charges, Velma eventually confessed to more killings. She admitted to poisoning her mother, Lillian Bullard. She confessed to murdering Dolly Edwards and John Henry Lee, but investigators suspected there were even more victims. Her first husband, Thomas Burke, had died in suspicious circumstances. The pattern of deaths around Velma stretched back years. The true body count might never be known. Velma Barfield's trial began in November 1978. The prosecution sought the death penalty for Stewart Taylor's murder. It was one of the first times North Carolina pursued capital punishment for a woman. The case attracted national attention. Reporters from across the country came to cover the trial. The death row granny made headlines everywhere. Prosecutor Joe Freeman Britt painted Velma as a cold-blooded killer. He showed the jury evidence of her careful planning. He demonstrated her calculated cruelty. The defense tried a different approach. They portrayed Velma as a victim of circumstances. They talked about her abusive childhood and difficult marriages. They claimed her prescription drug addiction had impaired her judgment. Defense lawyers argued that Velma deserved life in prison, not death. They said she was mentally ill and needed treatment. They emphasized her role as a mother and grandmother. The prosecution counted that Velma knew exactly what she was doing. She had planned each murder carefully. She had covered her tracks expertly. On the 2nd of November, 1978, the jury found Velma Barfield guilty of first-degree murder. They also found her guilty of using poison to commit the crime. The penalty phase began immediately. Velma Barfield was sentenced to death. She became the first woman on North Carolina's death row in decades. Velma was held at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was placed in an area for escape-prone and mentally ill prisoners. There was no designated death row section for women. She was North Carolina's only female death row inmate. Her presence forced the state to reconsider how they housed condemned women. During her 6 years on death row, Velma underwent a religious transformation. She became a devout Christian and began ministering to other prisoners. Even evangelist Billy Graham praised her prison ministry work. Velma's religious conversion became the basis for appeals. Supporters argued that she had truly reformed and should be spared. A psychiatrist testified that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Dr. Dorothy Lewis claimed Velma had an alternate personality named Billy. This personality had supposedly committed the murders after childhood sexual abuse. The judge was unconvinced by the psychiatric testimony. He reportedly said, "One of them did it. I don't care which one." When Velma's final appeal was denied in federal court, she made an unusual decision. She instructed her attorneys to abandon further appeals to the Supreme Court. She wanted to die with dignity. Velma had accepted her fate and stopped fighting the execution. This decision shocked many who had supported her appeals. On the 2nd of November, 1984, Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection. She was 52 years old. She was the first woman executed in America since 1962. Before her execution, Velma released a statement apologizing to victims' families. She said, "I know that everybody has gone through pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry." She chose cheese doodles and Coca-Cola as her final meal, simple choices that seemed to reflect her ordinary appearance. Velma had requested that her organs be donated for transplant purposes. However, her heart could not be restarted after the execution. Only her corneas and some skin tissue were successfully donated. She was buried in a small rural North Carolina cemetery. Her grave was placed near her first husband, Thomas Burke. Velma Barfield killed at least 6 people over nearly a decade. She confessed to murdering her mother, Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, and Stuart Taylor. Jennings Barfield's exhumed body also contained arsenic. Her case changed how people viewed female serial killers. She challenged stereotypes about who could be a deadly predator. The grandmother image had hidden a calculating killer. Velma's story also highlighted the vulnerability of elderly people in care. Families became more cautious about trusting caregivers with their loved ones. The investigation revealed problems in death investigation procedures. Many suspicious deaths had been ruled natural without proper testing. Law enforcement improved their protocols after her case. Singer-songwriter Jonathan Byrd was the grandson of Jennings Barfield. He later wrote a song called Velma about the murders. The song gave a personal account of the impact on his family. Velma Barfield's case remains one of the most shocking in American crime history. A grandmother who used her caring image to commit murder, a woman who poisoned the people who trusted her most. She moved through small North Carolina communities like a deadly shadow. Families welcomed her into their homes with open arms. They relied on her for comfort and care. But Velma saw vulnerable people as opportunities for profit. She killed without remorse and covered her tracks expertly. Her prescription drug addiction fueled her constant need for money. The pills had changed her personality completely over the years. The caring mother had become a calculating killer. The transformation was gradual but complete. Velma's victims never suspected the woman caring for them. They trusted her with their lives completely. She used that trust to destroy them slowly. What do you think about Velma Barfield's case? Was justice served with her execution? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.